You've likely heard that progressive overload is the key driver to muscle growth. However, it's not really a driver at all. And this small misunderstanding speaks to the larger problem of most lifters don't understand what progressive overload is, and if they do, they tend to implement it incorrectly. So in this video, we're going to break down progressive overload. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, how to do it, why it happens, the time frames on which we should expect it to happen on, and some practical training takeaways as well. So by the end of this video, you'll know more about this topic than 99% of trainers. My name is Ameerbarbour, I am a chemical engineer, and today we are discussing progressive overload. So first of all, what is progressive overload and why is there confusion around it? Well, in the simplest sense, it is getting stronger over time, either by adding weight or adding reps to the movements that you're doing using the same form. Key word there. Okay, and the reason there's some confusion around this is because exercise science tends to define words fairly poorly. Here's an example of progressive overload. If last week I was curling a 30-pound dumbbell for 6 reps, if this week I curl that same 30-pound dumbbell for 7 reps, that's progressive overload. Okay, or if I grabbed a 35-pound dumbbell and curled it for 5 reps, that again is progressive overload. Here's the key point. If it's not one of those two things, it's not progressive overload. So here's a short list of things that are not progressive overload. 1, adding more volume or adding more sets. So if last week I did 2 sets of an exercise and this week I did 3 sets of an exercise, if I didn't get stronger, if I didn't do more weight or more reps, progressive overload has not occurred. 2, progressing your form. If you change your form week to week, that is not progressive overload because we are no longer comparing apples to apples. We can't be certain we actually got stronger. For example, let's say you're benching 135 with good control, good, clean, smooth reps, and then the next week you load up 185 and you're just whoop-pump, bouncing it off your chest. You didn't experience 50 pounds worth of strength gains or muscle growth. You're doing a different exercise entirely, and a worse one. 3, changing exercise tempo, which kind of falls in with exercise form. None of those are progressive overload. A common misconception is that progressive overload is the driver to muscle growth. But in reality, it's just an indicator that muscle growth has likely occurred. It's not the cause, it is the effect. The cause or the stimulus for muscle growth is mechanical tension, specifically when you're operating near maximum levels of effort. And this distinction matters because we can get stronger due to a variety of adaptations, 6 that we know of specifically, and muscle growth is only one of them. So just because we got stronger does not necessarily imply that we've grown muscle. So if progressive overload doesn't happen over time, then we can be pretty certain that none of those adaptations happened, which means no muscle growth. But if it does happen, it doesn't always mean that growth was the reason. And muscle growth specifically is rarely, if ever, the only contributing factor. That's why we should aim for progressive overload, but also understand there are other adaptations that increase your strength along the way. So theory is always great, but how do we actually go about applying this in a gym setting? Let's just assume that you like working in the 6 to 12 rep range, which is great for muscle growth. And to make this example easy, we take all of our sets to failure. Initially, you'd want to choose a weight where you hit failure at 6 or 7 reps, and then week after week, you want to stick with that weight until you can get up to maybe 11 or 12 reps. Now, once you're at the upper end of this rep range, you would increase the load, which is going to decrease the amount of reps you can do. So now you're bumped back down to the lower end of that rep range. Maybe you only do 7. And then you would stick with that new weight until you got back up to the 11 or 12, and then you just rinse and repeat over time. For the record, that's not the only way to go about progressive overload, but it is the most straightforward, and I tend to do it and recommend it to my clients. So we know our destination and what we're aiming for, but what does the path there actually look like? Well, in practice, progressive overload is not a linear process. It's not add 5 pounds every week. It would be nice and simple if it was, but that's not the way this goes. Instead, it looks more like a stock market chart, if you picked a good stock. Okay, if you zoom way in and you're looking at your strength day to day or week to week, you will see fluctuations. Sometimes it will tick up, sometimes it will tick down. But if you zoom out, what you like to see is that the trend is going up and to the right over time. And there are a lot of factors that can cause these dips, such as poor sleep consistently, low calories, low carbs, stress, low motivation, things of that nature, just life in general. So when we're zoomed in, these little fluctuations up and down are relatively unpredictable because life is unpredictable. But when we zoom out, we have a pretty good idea of what the graph should look like over the course of a training program. So early on, strength rises relatively rapidly because not only do we have muscle growth occurring, but there is a large increase in coordination improvements. Think of coordination improvements as your body getting more efficient at doing the same movement. For example, let's say we're doing a barbell back squat. Your brain has to orchestrate like, hey, quads, you're gonna do this, glutes, you're gonna do this, I'll send you this many resources and this many resources. Maybe we should push our butt back a little more. Overall, you're just getting more coordinated at doing the movement. So assuming we didn't gain a single gram of muscle, these coordination improvements can make you much stronger. Now, in the case of a simple, stable exercise, these coordination improvements tend to level off to an extent after about 4 to 8 weeks. But if we're talking about a more complex, unstable movement like a barbell back squat, it might take longer to max out those coordination improvements. In any case, it's a big contributor to early on having big rises in strength. There are also other neural adaptations that we can talk about, but we'll just leave it at that for now. But essentially, once those level off, we enter this period where things kind of flatten out and we're fighting for our life to get a rep here or 5 pounds there. And this is what I call the grind zone. At this point in the program, when we've gotten a lot of those coordination improvements out of the way, there's 2 things to be said. One, we are now performing the most coordinated movement pattern that we're going to do in the course of this program. We are doing this movement the most efficiently that we can. That's 1. 2, we are much more certain that these small increases in strength are due to muscle growth because we've eliminated more or less some of the other neural factors. So instead of chasing novelty and jumping on another program, this is the time to stick it out. And this is the time that most people jump ship. And then when they go start a new program with new exercises, they go back through this rapid strength gain phase. Then as soon as they get to the grind zone, they're out. And that's generally why they have slower rates of muscle growth. So overall, stick out the grind zone. If you've never ran a program for 12 to 16 weeks, I heavily recommend you do so. And if at the end of that 12 to 16 weeks, you are still seeing consistent progress, feel free to stick with it for even longer. I've stuck with programs for the better part of a year. We've learned a lot about progressive overload, and the last piece of nuance that you need to fully understand this topic is how we should change our exercise form. So as I've mentioned, if we're gonna look at progressive overload in the literal sense, then no, you cannot change your form week to week. However, practically speaking, we should definitely change our form if there's significant room for improvement. And usually improving your form will mean that you need to lower the weight, at least for a period of time. Progressively overloading bad form leads to subpar results in muscle growth, as well as a much larger injury risk. But this is hands down the biggest mistake I see in the gym: people not performing their reps correctly. Because I don't care. The rest of it does not matter. It doesn't matter how efficient your program is if your reps aren't good. 1 rep is the fundamental unit of weight training because your sets are just a collection of reps, your workouts are a collection of sets, and your program's a collection of workouts. It all comes back to 1 rep. This is so important. So nail 1 rep and then progressively overload that nailed rep. You don't have to be perfect, but you should be striving for really good. The last note on form, it's not a fix it and forget it type of deal. It's more like tuning an instrument. So you tune it once and then it sounds good, slowly goes out of tune, all right? And then you eventually need to sit down and work on it and tune it up again. Same thing with form, okay? So that might play into your graph as a little pit stop or a downtrend where you have to lower the weight, focus on form for a little bit, and then build back up from there. I think we hit everything on the list, but let's just wrap it all up into one clean paragraph, all right? Progressive overload is not the driver of muscle growth, it's an indicator that it has likely occurred. There are several other adaptations that can drive you to get stronger. There are only 2 ways to do progressive overload. You either add reps with the same weight, or you add weight. Only 2 ways to do it. Over the course of your program, it's not going to go up linearly. It's not a straight line. It's a curve that wiggles along the way. Progression will fluctuate week to week, but that's okay as long as we zoom out and we're just heading in the up and right direction. And none of this matters if your form is crap. So spend time working on your form, progressively overload that form. If it starts getting crappy again, work on your form, progressively overload that. I hope you find this helpful, and if you liked it, like, comment, subscribe, share it with a friend, send it to your mom, I don't know. Anything would be appreciated. Peace.